Welcome to Sex Ed with DB. I'm your host, DB. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the podcast. If you love and support the work that we do, consider joining my crew on Patreon to win amazing prizes like our adorable merch, exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and incredible sex toys. Go to patreon.com/sexedwithdb to join my crew. Get discounts at all of your favorite sex toy shops at sexedwithdb.com. And follow us on Insta at sexedwithdb podcast and on TikTok at sexedwithdb. If you want to partner with us, email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. Hello, everybody. Happy summer. I hope everyone is doing well as summer is coming to a close here. I'm very excited for this fun summer bonus episode that we have for you here because we have partnered with Advocates for Youth to bring you this episode. If you haven't heard of Advocates for Youth, they are an amazing organization based in DC that partners with young leaders, adult allies, and youth-serving organizations to really advocate for policies and champion programs that really recognize young people's rights to honest sexual health info, accessible, confidential, and affordable sexual health services, and the resources and opportunities necessary to create sexual health equity for all youth. Absolutely love their mission. They're incredible. If you want to check them out, they're on Instagram at Advocates for Youth, on TikTok at Advocates for Youth, and on Twitter at Advocates Tweets. Without further ado, please enjoy today's episode. Hello, Max. How's it going?
It's going great.
Amazing. What's so great? Tell me.
I just got out of a protest with Ron DeSantis against Ron DeSantis.
Boy.
Which was an education protest.
Okay.
He's doing an education tour endorsing some school board candidates who are against sex ed. So we are very on topic today.
On theme. That's really amazing that you went to that today. There's a lot of questions that I have for you regarding that. But before we get started into the deep end, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us about your work.
Yeah, so I am the founder and president of PRISM. So we work to expand access to LGBT-inclusive education and sexual health resources for youth in South Florida. We specifically focus on digital education, so really reaching young people where they're increasingly turning to for info, which is online. Aside from that, I also do live classes on TikTok about gender and sexuality, sexual health, LGBT history, and activism.
Wow, really great elevator pitch. You have that down to a T.
I try.
Very impressive. And how old are you?
I'm 20.
Amazing. Really the youth, you're the youth, by the way, compared to me. I'm turning 30 in December. So, not too much older, but in a sense, you as a young person have so much more info, have your finger on the pulse when it comes to what other young people and teenagers specifically are interested in and how they're learning. So I'm very, very lucky to have you today. So thank you for being on.
Well, I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah. So tell me more about the founding of PRISM. Like, I would love to know how you decided to found this organization. Like, does it have to do with what your sex ed was like growing up? Like, what made you so passionate about this? Give me the backstory.
Yeah, so we actually started as a high school club. So I was the vice president and then president of my GSA. And frankly, our GSA just wasn't it. I think there was a lot of tension with our staff sponsor and our old GSA and other leadership. And so we really wanted a fresh slate. And so we founded PRISM as another high school club. And unfortunately, our high school did not love the idea of having two LGBT clubs on campus. They actually
They're like, that's too many.
they hated that idea, which is funny because our sponsor didn't even need the stipend or anything. She's like, I'll do it for free. But they were like, no, no, no. Even though, they have what, 3 Christian clubs and 4 environmental clubs and,
Sure.
what have you. But, and so, so we fought for a year to really make this space that we really wanted to be more centered around activism, more centered around education. Our GSA had been more of a drop-in safe space, which is still important, but it wasn't really like the sorts of resources that we were looking and aiming to provide. And so after about a year of fighting, I was about to graduate. Some other leadership in our club, our unofficial, unsanctioned club that was meeting at the Whole Foods across the street. That was kind of place that I lived in. There's a Whole Foods across the street. Meeting there with our unofficial, unsanctioned little mini pride parade across the street every week. We decided, forming a nonprofit had always been this sort of far off thing that we wanted to do down the line. And I think that once we realized that being like a high school club and getting administration to like us wasn't super feasible, we decided to, I guess, take our business elsewhere. And expand out into the community and incorporate as a nonprofit. And we did this right at the start of the pandemic. And I think that when we started doing this, I think we started making this push in December 2019. We finally did the paperwork and all of that in March. As things were just starting to close down. And I think at that point we thought, this is just going to be a really long spring break.
Sure. As we all did, as we all naively
and,
thought.
And then that spring break lasted 2 years.
Right.
And so here we are. I think that we very quickly realized, we finally incorporated late April of 2020, when I was just about to turn 18.
Wow, big birthday present.
And yeah, a little under a month early. And I think once we realized how large scale and long term this pandemic was going to be, it really shifted our idea of what we wanted to do as an organization, at least in the short term, right? We weren't able to, we actually had in-person events lined up prior to this and all this other stuff as we were working on incorporating and becoming a nonprofit. And then can I cuss on here?
Please go for it.
And then shit hit the fan, and we realized that we were going to need to, at least short term, make some shifts to online. And what's really interesting is what we realized in doing that was that there were going to continue to be so many benefits to doing digital advocacy beyond the pandemic. There are so many people who are looking for these resources. A lot of the times, the people who are in most need of resources, especially around LGBT issues, are not able to access in-person community centers. There are organizations in our community that do amazing work for LGBT youth, but they're really only accessible to people who can get there, right? Having something where you can have, as long as you have an internet connection and a phone or a computer, that you can access these resources and learn about your community. You can learn about how to take care of yourself physically and emotionally and sexually. You can learn about the history of the LGBT community and all of those things. It is so impactful for people that normally wouldn't be able to be reached, and young people that normally wouldn't be able to be reached. And it's fun. We came full circle. Because we have our PRISM Student Ambassador Program, which is aimed to bolster LGBT student organizing in South Florida, and my old high school, the one that would not let us form as a high school club, their GSA as a new sponsor, and they are one of the inaugural members for our student.
Wow, that really is full circle. That must
So
feel very
we
validated.
weaseled our way back on campus in the end, anyways.
Oh yeah, that is incredible. And how many members do you have? Kind of where are you at right now with the amount of people that you reach?
Yeah, so the thing about PRISM is we're not just a youth serving organization, we're youth led. So that means that it does fluctuate wildly depending on the time of year. We obviously what works out is that young people have more free time during the summer, and that is when Pride Month is. So we need a lot more volunteer support. But we have a whole social media team that is volunteer led, because the name of the game for us, like I said, it's digital education, and it's about, and so that again, that sort of varies depending on the time of year, but it can be anywhere from, 10 to 20 people that are on our social media team alone. And we have, dozens of volunteers on and off helping volunteer at events and protesting with us and testifying at school boards and protesting and all sorts of other really cool stuff. So quite a few.
Wow. Congrats, first of all. That is a huge success already, 2 years into it, let alone the fact that you have been growing and really expanding over the course of a global pandemic where folks not only are in need of your resources, but a lot more so because they're home, because they're not able to reach their communities as much, because they're not able to be in person with a lot of people who make them feel at home. So really incredible. Kudos to you and to your founding team and the people who run your work now, who volunteer. Was there like an aha moment for you when you realized, either like growing up as a kid or like more recently, that this was the work that you were super passionate about?
Yeah, I think that I everything that is all these big moments in my life I've stumbled into, which isn't to say that I was careless by any means, but I actually originally studied computer science.
Oh, wow.
And I think that I started getting into coding in middle school in like fifth, sixth grade. And my parents were like, that is a career field that is going to make our son so much money. So let's
Mm,
push that, right? And and so they did, and felt like I wasn't into it. Um, and so that was sort of became like that was the thing that I was gonna do. And then I moved after a 2-year hiatus out in the desert in California. I moved back to South Florida, and new high school, new people, and there was and I knew that there was going to be a GSA meeting, and after school, and I thought, screw it, I'll go. And they just happened to be signing up people for elections that very day, and I was like, screw it, and I ran for vice president. And so that was a little sort of spur of the moment
very
impulse.
cool, very bold
I
move.
have ADHD, so impulse control is not one of my like is not has not been one of my strong suits in the past. And sometimes it works out in my favor. Other times.
Yeah.
But that sort of was a pivotal moment that sort of set me off on this trajectory. It's not really something LGBT advocacy, LGBT activism was never something that I was super invested in. Obviously, I am a gay man, but being in that activist sphere was not something that really seemed I wish I had strong political views, but doing anything about them was not my thing. And so I think that was a really, really pivotal moment for me. I think that, and then incorporating in all of that. But I think that really where the reason that we started forming as that Prism started forming specifically as a high school club is I realized I was in an LGBT leadership position, but I did not know, at 16, I did not know. I started learning about LGBT history more, and I started learning about, I started deep diving into all of that and about HIV and AIDS and STIs and sexual health in general. And I realized I didn't know who Harvey Milk was. I barely knew of the Stonewall riots or Marsha P. Johnson. I didn't know the difference between HIV and AIDS, didn't know what PrEP was. Um, all of these really, really fundamental things about LGBT history and sexual health, especially in the LGBT community, that I was sort of oblivious to. And once I started learning about these and sort of learning about how fundamental these aspects of all of these sort of sectors of the work that we do are, I thought like, wow, why was I not privy to any of this, as
Mm,
especially, not just as an LGBT, young person, but as the leader of an LGBT club, like as the at that point the president of our GSA. Why am I just now learning about all of this? It's absolutely ridiculous. And so I think that sort of put me in this position where I was like, okay, so someone needs to spill the beans on on all of this information for other people, because it's so important and so fundamental, to our understanding of the LGBT community, of sexual health, and all of the above. And so that was really what set me off this trajectory of really wanting to push that education and towards more people.
wow. Yeah, really makes sense. I feel like a lot of folks who I've spoken to have said similar things about like their passion for sexual and reproductive health or for, yeah, queer history is born out of like this injustice that they feel that they weren't taught any of those things by their parents or their, school or their textbooks, or the media isn't really properly portraying like what that really feels like and is like in a real way. So that's really awesome. I want to go back to one thing that you said before about PRISM, which is that not only does it have a ton of young people in it, but it is youth led. I think like as a public health student and as someone who's doing this work as a sex educator, we learn all the time that if you're not including the population that you want to reach in your leadership and as a part of the people who create the curriculum and create the assets and who you poll to see how the messaging resonates and you pay in order for them to share their expertise and their time, like that is incredibly important. And I'm wondering if you can articulate to the listeners, like, why do you think it's super important that this organization, PRISM, is youth led? And I'm wondering also if you can talk a little bit about Advocates for Youth and how they have kind of supported you in your sex education work.
Yeah, so PRISM follows what we call a buy and for model, which means that if we're creating resources for a specific demographic, and that doesn't just mean youth, I mean we're a youth serving organization, but that also means space, when we're talking about intersectional issues, the mono minority myth, for example, or the Crown Act and things like that, or Black history or API history, or when we're talking about gender nonconformity or trans issues. If we're creating resources for a specific community, we want to make sure that they are created by a specific community. And that doesn't just mean, when we're making videos that we have like a trans person or gender nonconforming person, on the face of the video. It also means that they're behind the scenes, that we have that representation at all levels of our organization, from our board of directors all the way down to our more irregular volunteers and everything in between. And so making sure that was a fundamental part of who we are as an organization. Our slogans for every color, for everyone, and we really
Mm,
live and breathe that through a buy and for model. And that translates into, as well, into being youth led. I mean, we um I think that nobody understands how to reach young people, especially online, like young people do.
mhm,
um Nobody's going to be able to keep up with trends and be able to really understand how and why, and what people are, young people are engaging on the internet with, the way that young people themselves will be able to. And so I think that is a very, very fundamental aspects of how we're doing that work. Um, and and I think that with Advocates for Youth, they really supported me. I think a lot in strategy, which has been really really helpful. So that's part of that social media strategy, right? And the other thing is just connecting me with more people. I mean, I'd like to say well connected either way, but I make sure I show face of things for sure. But they've connected me with so many people, getting me, what they're, Advocates for Youth is what really got me started with school board work, actually, because the Miami-Dade School Board was going to be voting on approving a sex ed textbook. um, and so they're the ones who sort of brought that to light and got me connected with some other organizations that really pushed me to start working more with pushing the school board to have more inclusive, more sex education, inclusive sex education, and that sort of stuff, and that work continues and is expanding now. And so I think that's a really fundamental way that I've really benefited from being a part of Advocates for Youth in particular.
Yeah, talk to me more about this school board stuff and you pushing them to, I'm assuming it's related to the Don't Say Gay law, or is it kind of different from that?
Yeah, so my Don't Say Gay work is very expensive beyond school boards.
Sure.
But as far as the school board, so they originally had relatively comprehensive sex education. They have what's called a 3 R's curriculum, and it's a module based thing that's free, right? That they can access online, and they got rid of it. About, I believe a couple of years ago, and we're voting to approve a textbook. So the state of Florida created a policy that before you could have school by school curriculum, and they created a policy that that each school board has to vote on a textbook for the entire school district, and so they have to have something consistent, and parents have to be able to review it, and there's a comment period. So it's not the best thing. They actually they wouldn't allow it. They're not going to be allowing students to access chapters on sexual orientation and gender identity, which is silly because we're talking a middle school and high school textbook. And the Don't Say Gay bill, as it stands now, only officially applies to K through 3 until there's new standards that will be coming out in January, in which case will likely also be restricting higher grade levels as well. But they're timid about it. And so, and also, unfortunately, the Miami-Dade School Board is becoming increasingly conservative. So, and so we had to fight for them to approve that textbook. Luckily they did, but unfortunately for us, because there's that comment period, 278 petitions were filed against this textbook. Only 44 were actually from parents in Miami-Dade. The rest were from people that I don't think lived in the county, or were just didn't have kids in that were school age. You know what I mean?
Just loud curmudgeon,
loud,
homophobes.
Just loud old people, or organized people from really conservative organizations.
Sure.
So they had to do a comment period, do a hearing, go to a hearing. There was a hearing officer, give them 2 weeks, and the hearing officer said, these objections are stupid. They're stupid, and you should keep the textbook. And then they have to have a 30-day period, and then have a meeting. So it's a whole delayed, 2.5 months or whatever.
Right.
We're talking a school year that starts that just started last week.
I was gonna say, didn't it already begun?
And so at this point, they approved it back in April, and so at this point it's delaying this until June, late June. And so they had to do it another hearing, and public meeting. And so we mobilized people like crazy to speak on this. And in those 30 days, we packed the room. There were 42 people spoke, and 38 of them were in favor of this textbook. The other 4, or there are 5 people that spoke out not in favor of the textbook, and 4 of them were forcibly removed for yelling at the school board members and all this other stuff. There's Moms for Liberty. It's always a party when they're a super conservative organization that opposes mask mandates, and
of course it's all in the same
and just gave Ron DeSantis a sort of Liberty Award or something at their conference in Tampa. They're messy for sure. But and called us groomers and pedophiles and whatever else they like to call gay people now. And so but we stuck with it. Unfortunately, they chose to reject the petition. And then I got whiplash, right? Because then they realized, oh, it's state standard, we have to have sex ed curriculum.
Oh wow.
So we have now, and it takes 4 to 8 months to approve a new textbook. So they were like, well, what are we going to do now? Because it's a semester long class. They take it in PE. High schoolers who take that in the fall aren't going to get sex ed. So now we need to figure something out. So they schedule an emergency meeting. And if 3 days out, in this 3 days, we got 2,800 petition signatures from over 90% are from parents in Miami-Dade, and then some educators and organizers also signed on as well. 2,800 petition signatures. We started an email campaign, which there were 300 emails to each board member. And then once again showed up, packed the room, and very much outnumbered the people who are opposed to all of this, and in a very crazy turn of events, the chair of the board who had voted against this textbook said, she was not pursuing another term, so she's not beholden to getting reelected. So she said, well, what if I change my vote? Which you're allowed to do if you're on the winning side. You're allowed to do that. So, they had some other person had a whole battle with the parliamentarians. She was like, you can't do that. And it's like, no, she definitely can.
Drama.
And they changed the vote. And then we got the sex ed. We had planned a whole die-in for outside the thing in case it went bad. And then I was like, all right, y'all can pack up because we won.
But you won.
And we were expecting it to take another 5 months or so, 8 months of going to these long 12 hours, been there for 12 hours at some point straight, and so it was very nice to not
yeah I'm sure you had put so much work, obviously, and effort and organizing into this, so that's a major congrats to get a comprehensive sex ed textbook in the school district. That's amazing.
It was arduous.
Yeah, I bet. Oh my God. Wow. Okay, we have a couple of questions left here. I want to know for you, what really does LGBTQ legislation look like and school sex ed curriculum look like when it is comprehensive, inclusive? And what are some topics of sex ed that you wish that you could have learned about, other than the stuff that you mentioned specifically with queer history, queer rights? Are there other kind of sex education topics that you're super passionate about?
Yeah, so I had the benefit of actually having relatively inclusive sex education.
That's great.
I don't think I made it sound really bad at the beginning, because I didn't get an LGBT inclusive history education.
Right.
But I had very inclusive sex education. In a lot of example scenarios, for example, so it talks about relationship abuse, consent. It talks about STIs. In example scenarios, they specifically use non-gendered names, like Alex and Sam and things like that, so that you could sort of imagine really anyone being in that situation, and imagine yourself and whatever gender or genders that you love being in that situation, which was really, really empowering. They talked about same-sex relationships and transgender people in a positive light.
Oh my God, this is kind of unheard of for many people who I interview, so this is great.
And this was in Palm Beach County, which is actually a very, 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 very progressive has a very, very progressive school board. It's a very, very progressive area. And so it was sort of like the creme de la creme of inclusive sex education. And even in a state of like Florida, where we have, prior to the Dumpster Gable, we had the closest thing that we actually had to what we call a no promo homo law, was a law that required that if you talk about AIDS or HIV, which isn't required by state standards, but they can talk about it, they also have to discuss the benefits of abstinence outside of a mutually monogamous heterosexual marriage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they can talk about condoms, but they have to be like, you should you should not have sex
Don't
unless you're
do
married,
it.
unless you're straight married.
Yep.
And so, and I had a teacher, I don't remember which year it was because they all kind of blur into one. But I had a teacher who actually, believe actually mentioned the fact that that law existed, and then said, we're gonna be breaking the law today.
Oh, so badass.
So it actually pointed out the fact that is what we were doing, and then talked about HIV and talked about LGBT relationships in a positive light in the same breath, which was very refreshing for sure. What's unfortunate is that is not consistent. There's not a lot of oversight. In general, even when we have very inclusive sex education, even in standards, there's not a lot of oversight making sure that that is applied. So I know people that were, a classroom over, that were in the same school, not even just talking different school district, different school, in the same school that might have had a different teacher, who did not have that experience. Right. Whatsoever. And so I think that's a key issue there, is making sure that there is consistency there, that if we have inclusive education, that inclusive education is really accessible to everyone, regardless of what, school or teacher they have. But I think that it's that sort of stuff that I really want to see, to be able to learn about my community, to be able to see that in a positive light. And also I don't think I learned about PrEP, and I think that HIV prevention is one of those key topics that I'd really like to see more of.
I really like that. I guess, okay, two more questions. One of them is like, what is like one main thing, I guess, like as a young person in this work, being able to access other young people? Like, is there something that really comes up in your DMs all the time? Like one common theme that you really, really are so excited to get to teach someone about?
I think the common theme of what I get is, thank you for doing this, because I didn't get this sort of information.
Yeah.
And I think that I get a lot more one-on-one conversations when we're talking about my TikTok and my live classes, or I'm I'm able to write on a board like sex ed for bad bitches, and that sort of catches people's eyes. But I think that that's one of those things that, I think that talking about like stigma is one of those things, which is, I guess, a very broad topic, but that's one of those things that I really, really like discussing and really breaking that down, because I think that's a fundamental sort of barrier to learning about sex ed in general.
Yes, incredibly important. I think like for us, a lot of the stigma related like DMs we get are around like masturbation, and around like, I feel so much shame, embarrassment, like I'm harmed from my like religious practice about masturbation. And it's so powerful to be like, hey, like that's totally normal. And like most people masturbate and it's really healthy actually. And like that's okay. But it is really powerful to be able to create your own content in your own like silly, funny, like outlandish, quote unquote, fucking badass way,
Right.
and be able to access the
And
people
I
who
get
you
to
want
draw a peach emoji on the board. I've gotten so good at it too. Like, just like,
incredible.
yeah.
Yes, that's so wonderful. Um, Max, we have one last question. Thank you again so much for joining. I would love to like we could, do like a PRISM Sex Ed with DB live. We could talk more about
I
the
love to.
the work that you're doing. We can chat about that offline, but tell me what's like next for you and PRISM, and where our listeners can follow and tune in.
So there's so much stuff. I think that we're really getting way more into video. We're getting way more into finding new ways, even beyond social media. One thing that I love is like interactivity, like gamifying things, and building more sort of back and forth into the ways in which we communicate, so that it's not so detached. Which is why I love live streams in particular. But I think that so I think that that's something that we're going to see a lot more of, is really expanding the ways in which we're able to interact, and in which we're able to sort of like have fun talking about sex ed in a more like sort of intimate way. But if folks want to check me out, I am at Maxx Fenning on everything, MAXX FENNING. PRISM has a different username on everything. Instagram is at prism.fl, TikTok's at prismfl, and Twitter is at prism_fl. We're also www.prismfl.org.
Oh, love it so much. Just on behalf of other people in this work, I really thank you for basically just doing like everything that exactly like you said, people have political views and they don't do anything about them. And you are actively doing something about it from a very young age for your career, even if it's not permanent. For now, you're making a lot of a difference in the world and in Florida and locally. And so I just want to say thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure to get to know you.
Absolutely, ditto.
Our creator, host, EP, and sound engineer is me, Danielle Bezalel, aka DB. Our co-producer and communications lead is Cathren Cohen. Our music theme is by Hook Sounds, and our ad music is by my stepdad, Bill Gant. Thank you so much to our featured guests, partners, and our listeners. Want to advertise with us? Email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. For more sex ed content, follow us on IG at sexedwithdb podcast and on TikTok at sexedwithdb. See you next time.